From his childhood, Miquella the Kind strove to right the wrongs of this blighted world and live a life of compassion and kindness. And yet Miquella's entire life of compassion and kindness is immediately thrown to the wayside as simple acts of evil charming and compulsion by a community whose souls have been turned dark by an evil and cruel god. So many of you need to just wake up from the nightmare you can't always be that scared little child in the rickety shack, clinging to Dolly Mama's arm. I know the bad man hurt you so bad that you can't see something good when it's right in front of you, and this team up doesn't bode well for hope. But don't worry, I am here to help you see the light. I am sure that after we explore Miquella's context, situation, intentions, choices, actions, and the results, you'll take a good, long, hard look in the mirror and consider your own dark soul, shortly before drafting your apology letter to the Golden Boy. Kindly Miquella grew up in a world bereft of death, taken from the equation by his trauma queen mother, his siblings all cursed, the lands between infested with worn, derelict denizens begging for death, blighted with sickness and driven mad. War, ruin, and meddling powers vying for supremacy at the expense of all and everyone else. In this world of chaos and changing ages, dawning prejudice, forever stuck in a cycle of hatred and revenge, Miquella the Kind spent his time trying to right the wrongs of this blighted world, to heal the ailed, shelter the abandoned, and mend the broken. He dedicated his life to try and quell the rot destroying his sister, tried sincerely to offer his suffering brother a true death, built the Haligtree as a refuge for the hopeless and helpless, was a beacon of light to the unjustly persecuted, and even attempted to reintroduce something as close to death as possible in a world broken by his mother's removal of it, Saint Trina and her eternal sleep. A mercy to those begging for an end. After ceaselessly trying to find the answers and build the solutions himself, and after ceaselessly being foiled by other powers scrambling in their race for divinity in a shattered world, Miquella realized that what he was doing was simply applying band-aids to bullet wounds, and that if he were to bring about a world of compassion, he would need to enter the Game of Thrones himself, personally. He had the compassion, but he did not have the power to encompass all with it. Miquella was eternally cursed to be a child, while his other siblings were all great warlords, mages or warriors. He himself was fragile and eternally young. They all used their natural strength, talent for war, and other blessings or curses in the vie for their power, and so too would Miquella use the only power he knew, the power of charm. And for a being set on godhood, in direct competition with beings just as powerful, just as capable, and far more maniacal, makes the stakes the absolute highest that they could be, where one mistake, one miscalculation could mean the end to everything he has done or will ever do.
A single betrayal, enough to turn the tides.
And the death of his vision of a world of compassion. The ability to charm was one hell of a weapon for assurance. After all, there is no room for variables on the road to divinity, and an absolute requirement of assurances. The power of Miquella's charm gave him this assurance. He is sincere in his promise to us to 1,000 years of compassion, breaking the cycle of hatred and revenge and beginning our Eden. His actions are proof of this. He surrenders everything for it, and for that to work, he needs assurance that the people involved will not cross him, that they would keep their word, their side of the promise or vow. By charming us, he was testing himself. While we were under his charm, would he take revenge against Ansbach, who apparently cleaved him?
But in his day, he was the feared commander of the pure-blood knights, who cleaved open Miquella the Kind with his blood blade.
Would he command us to do things that we would be against? Would he do things to us that would give us reasons to hate him once we woke from our charm? Would he break his promise to us? The answer is obvious, and reflected in the fact that all but 2 of his followers remain fiercely loyal, to the point of defending him to the death. All of them explaining that nothing had changed after the breaking of the charm in regards to Miquella. He passes the test by doing right by those he has charmed, and not abusing the position of power in that dynamic. He kept his promises, even to Mogh, albeit perhaps not exactly in the way he intended. So let's examine it further. the ones he charmed and their thoughts after the breaking of the charm, and the ones who rebelled, those he allegedly wronged. The first and most inevitable and obvious argument I always come up against when defending Miquella is of course his ability to charm people. Therefore, everything he does is suggested or outright stated by the masses that it involved him charming everyone. Even his own twin sister, who he dedicated his life to trying to heal, was magically charmed. Why else would she march against Radahn and reduce Caelid to nothing? But I would say, though he had the power to charm, not only did he not necessarily use it all of the time, but when he did not abuse that power. Rather, to assure an outcome only, like quelling an assailant, or keeping potentially dangerous parties inert without taking from their personal feelings, or keeping his secret buried until the time was right, or keeping hope lifted until salvation came, or keeping two parties in a toxic relationship apart before they intervened. And I would argue, perhaps as a sort of binding power to a vow or contract made with someone, like a real powerful, magical pinky swear. He would make a vow with them and then charm them to assure the outcome, holding them to their word, removing betrayal, bad will, or the fickleness of the human heart from the equation. After all, these are things he himself would be abandoning, assuring that there would be no lie in his promise, and the promise between both parties. This would even align with the theories that he does charm everyone. However, it does put a much different spin on the nature and use of his charm, as a sort of binding resolution to a contract, offering a modicum of the benefit of the doubt that people happily and wantonly extend to the Bloodlord Mogh and his right-hand leader of his cult of assassins, Ansbach, despite their in stark contrast to Miquella's history. Even then, if that is how he charmed people, it doesn't imply he charmed everyone, and we don't have proof either way outside the cases of the followers in the DLC and Mogh. This young Empyrean with the ability to charm was also, after all, quite charming, naturally, and in his actions. Not only physically gorgeous, not a trap, a certified ambush, but he was selfless. Name an item description, a single character who suggests that Miquella does things for his own benefit or in a malicious way. Every time we hear about Miquella, it is him trying to help someone. Not even Ansbach or Thollier, the only characters you can summon to help fight against Miquella, say that Miquella did this for himself or selfish reasons, or even that what Miquella wanted or intended to do was wrong.
As suspected, kindly Miquella has visited the lands which hold the tower, and appears intent on wholly dispossessing himself of his flesh. He must be seeking entrance to the Tower of Shadow. I can hardly believe it. He's divested himself of his very eye. Tender Miquella's eye is no mere morsel of flesh. It is a vessel of soaring grace, proof of his Empyrean lineage. I wonder, does Miquella the Kind intend to sever his very birthright, his fate as a child of the Erdtree? Righteous Tarnished, I have reasoned through my findings concerning Kind Miquella's intentions, why he is here. The full picture is yet to coalesce, but we do know that he is bound for the Tower of Shadow, and that is where he intends to rise to true godhood. The Tower of Shadow houses a divine gateway. A well-kept secret it was, but the gateway was once the birthplace of a god we know all too well.
Only that for Ansbach, his deal with Mogh was unfair in his eyes, and he wished for his own selfish reasons regarding his oath to Mogh to take back his remains, as he personally regretted not being able to protect his lord and uphold his oath. After all, this is a man of honor, who frankly would have rather died when he slashed Miquella, instead of the compassion he received. He was cordial and showed no animosity in his words, regretting the situation that they found themselves in.
General Radahn, a pleasure to see you after all this time. But those remains do not belong to you. Lord Mogh will have his dignity.
driven by his honor and duty, at the expense of a millennia of compassion for this broken world.
Surely you recall that I once served Lord Mogh as a pureblood knight, after failing him in every regard, and losing sight of my vows. I'd do anything to make amends, in whatever meager way I can. Lord Mogh, your honor was my only.
Even if we kill him, he doesn't curse us or what we did to his lord. He uses Miquella's name in the same sentence with the same reverence as Mogh.
Utterly failed you both, Miquella the kind. Lord Mogh.
He thanks us for being with Leda, as she will need our help, and he seems sincere.
So you've taken Lady Leda's side. I'm glad she stands with an ally. She tends to overestimate the burden she might carry alone. Lady Leda, I ask you keep kindly Miquella in your care.
If we side with him, he even questions our very sanity.
Have you lost your wit? By my troth, you have no such debt to this old man, though I gladly welcome your decision.
But I'll get to Ansbach soon enough. Miquella was recognized by the ones who followed him, even the ones who refused embrace. And before you say, well, godhood is what he truly wanted, that was his selfish interest. One of the main points of this video is to argue that it wasn't what he wanted, but what he had to do. As I previously mentioned, he'd tried other solutions, and he realized they were band-aids on bullet wounds. That to make real change, to bring about an Eden, he had to become a god. A caged divinity. He would need to give up everything so that everyone could live in a truly compassionate world. I think this is reinforced that Miquella himself knew that this would cage him, that for all of us to be free in a world of compassion, he never would be. He would basically need to painfully delete himself and replace who he was with a perfect, unalloyed arbiter of compassion.
Miquella has said as much himself. He wishes now to throw it all away. He says the act, though undoubtedly painful, will sear clean the Erdtree's wanton sin. The truth of his claim can be found at each cross. It is evidence enough to earn my belief.
Saint Trina, as part of him, knew this. That is why he divested his love, among many other reasons, as it represented love for himself as well, that loved him so dearly it didn't want him to do this to himself, and would rather kill him to save him from it.
A caged divinity is beyond saving. You must kill Miquella. Grant him forgiveness.
Self-love and self-interest willing to sacrifice a compassionate world. A very extreme and toxic trait of love. One that a being set on godhood could not afford to have, nor the type of love that his age of compassion could be set upon. He would be reborn with unalloyed love. Love without self-obsession to a fatal and toxic depth, nor favoritism such as speaking to one and not even offering the other so much as a smile, no matter their desperation and sincerity. In that same area, he divested his doubt and vacillation. And in the Divine Tower, his fears. He knew all of this. He knew and feared the risks. He had doubt. He knew that for him to save everyone, he had to lose everything. To become a being fair and just, all-loving, devoid of prejudice, of favoritism, of corruption, and he still did it. For us. Of all of the characters speculated to be charmed, there are only several that we know definitively to have been charmed. Leda, Freya, Hornsent, Ansbach, Thollier, Mogh, Dryleaf, and Mogh. Of all of these characters who were charmed by Miquella, only 2 of them end up turning against him, summonable in the final boss battle, Thollier and Ansbach. Thollier is no exception, as he too was charmed by Miquella, temporarily overriding his obsession for his other toxic, abandoned half. Thollier has no qualm with Miquella, and acts on St. Trina's wishes. He is a depressed, self-deleticidal, masochist simp, trying to please the part of Miquella that he loved most, addicted to her love.
St. Trina, oh St. Trina, what velvety ambrosia is this? Your poison and the sweet sleep that follows. Oh please, let me hear your voice. Then you too must have paid a visit to St. Trina's garden of deepest purple. I'm drifting off in the sea of her poison. Soon I will hear her voice. Let me be. I won't be long.
Therein revealing a solid reason why Miquella divested himself of this love, which was capable of being so selective and toxic. This is also further shown in that if we do not complete Thollier's quest, he never comes to the final boss battle to kill Miquella, insinuating if he never finds St. Trina, if we don't tell him what she says. He never bothers attacking Miquella, and only does so out of his toxic love for her. In fact, I would argue that he outright doesn't want to attack Miquella, as when we tell him what St. Trina told us, he is absolutely enraged.
I'll thank you not to lie to me. I am the chosen, not you. Only I can doze off in the sea of St. Trina. Why would you hear her voice when I cannot? If you should utter these cruel untruths to me again, I won't be held responsible for my actions. Never utter these cruel untruths to me again. Please, enough. I cannot believe your cheek. And I will stand for it no longer.
Yes, his outrage that St. Trina isn't talking to him and is talking to us, but his outrage goes deeper than that. He hates us because he cannot afford to doubt us. If he did, he may very well be ignoring the object of his obsession. He has no choice but to believe us. All he wants to do is what St. Trina wants. So even if we were lying to him, even if we were an agent of the Erdtree, and this would make him a traitor to Miquella, possibly all on a total lie, he would still do it. And what we ask him to do is something he considers abhorrent and wretched, giving him the worst possible choice to make.
Tell me, please, assuming you spoke the truth back then, what did St. Trina tell you? You are a wretched, wretched soul. A nightmare come to plague me. Such a thing couldn't possibly be. Could it? St. Trina, please let me hear your voice in my everlasting slumber.
Thollier's betrayal is no condemnation of Miquella. If anything, it's a justification of his discarding of St. Trina. Such love was not fit for the age of compassion. It must be unalloyed love. On that same note, I'd like to point out that even if I'm wrong about him being reborn with unalloyed love, love and compassion are not the same thing and can be mutually exclusive. Not a single cross denoted his compassion being abandoned. Finally, Ansbach, the leader of the Blood Knights, Mogh's order of blood collectors whose hazing ritual involved slaughtering a maiden and drenching a cloth in her blood. He is presented to us as a kindly, wise old man, as the description of his literal mask suggests. Behind the mask is something else entirely. A fearful, jaded old man brimming with honed skill.
Righteous tarnished. Miquella the Kind makes my blood run cold. I am loath to admit it. But even at this very instant, I wish to run very far away indeed.
He insists that he's nothing but a worn-down over-the-hill soldier. But in his day, he was the feared commander of the pure-blood knights, who cleaved open Miquella the Kind with his blood blade.
Wishing nothing more than to simply play his part after Miquella defeated him, causing him to fail his oath to Mogh.
I only wanted to play my part. Curse these aging bones.
I adore how most of the fanbase go literally mask deep with this character. I can see why so many people are worried about Miquella's charm when they themselves would be charmed by a mask. Anyway, he doesn't take issue with what Miquella sought to do.
Righteous tarnished. I have reasoned through my findings concerning kind Miquella's intentions, why he is here. The full picture is yet to coalesce, but we do know that he is bound for the Tower of Shadow, and that is where he intends to rise to true godhood.
While he speaks of Miquella with fear and alarm, he also speaks of him with reverence, in the same likeness as Mogh when defeated.
Utterly failed you both, Miquella the Kind. Lord Mogh.
He used how Miquella achieved his goals to justify pursuing his oath to Mogh, to redeem it in whatever meager way he could.
Surely you recall that I once served Lord Mogh as a pureblood knight, after failing him in every regard, and losing sight of my vows. I'd do anything to make amends, in whatever meager way I can. Yes, I should have known. Even the truth was itself mere folly. As if using Lord Mogh to gain entrance to the Land of Shadow were not enough, he plans to use his corpse as the vessel of his king consort. He has forsaken Lord Mogh's soul. He desires only his empty shell.
While he calls him a monster and a creature, I believe this is because of Miquella's inability to be killed by his sword. That despite how skilled Ansbach was, how sharp his sword, Miquella's weapon was much more deadly. Also, having something like light and righteousness being the things that the right hand of a demon lord fears, makes total sense.
Once, in an attempt to free Lord Mogh from his enchantment, I challenged tender Miquella, only to have my own heart rather artfully stolen. I knew not how weak I was. I believed that with sufficient mastery, even an Empyrean would be within reach of my blade. I could not have been more mistaken. Miquella the Kind is a monster, pure and radiant. He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying.
And at the end, he calls his name in reverence with Mogh.
Utterly failed you both, Miquella the Kind. Lord Mogh.
He simply could not accept his method, as it led to Ansbach breaking his vow and becoming a fearful coward. He hated himself for this, and could not reconcile with it. It was the opposite of his legacy. After the charm breaks, and he learns of what Mogh was used for, that Miquella only wanted him for his body, which some of us would take as a compliment. That was the justification he needed, to act out of honor, and fulfill in any meager way he could, his blood vow to his lord.
I'd do anything to make amends, in whatever meager way I can.
Out of honor and duty, his own personal interests, over the possibility of a millennia of compassion for this beyond broken world. Again, he never once rebukes Miquella's aspirations or vision, just the fact that he didn't want Mogh for his personality. In fact, he doesn't even appear for the final boss battle if you don't give him this scroll, and he doesn't learn of Miquella's use for his lord. To me, this reinforces that he acts out of duty, of loyalty to his vow with Mogh, and a desperation to in any way uphold it after his folly. Not really out of hatred, or because he wants to stop Miquella's goals, just to retrieve his lord's body and offer him what he would consider a respectful rest. Or perhaps simply fulfilling his vow out of his crippling regret that he had not been able to protect his lord. This was an aging man who was rife with regret, wishing to simply play his part.
I only wanted to play my part. Curse these aging bones.
He even acknowledges there are such risks associated with pursuing lordship.
His Eminence was felled in an honorable duel, and such are the risks of seeking lordship.
And admits that what he is doing is not an act of logic, and would bear no justice. Yet for those reasons he was unable to let go. During the fight with Leda, Ansbach also makes several comments during our fight if we side with him that would suggest even he doesn't think that siding with him is the right move. He questions our sanity.
Have you lost your wit? By my troth, you have no such debt to this old man, though I gladly welcome your decision.
And with his dying breaths, after the charm is broken, calls to Mogh and Miquella in regret he failed them both.
Utterly failed you both, Miquella the kind, Lord Mogh.
With the two quote-unquote traitors covered, what about the others? Before the charm, Leda says,
"Don't you dare approach Miquella the Kind."
After the charm, Leda says,
"Don't you dare approach Miquella the Kind."
Not much has changed here. I think we can safely assume that she is Team Miquella unreservedly and regardless of a charm. Before the charm, Hornsent says,
Fie, another. Treading the heels of Miquella. Then, as that woman would surely say, we are in our purposes well aligned. But understand, your kind are not forgiven. The Erdtree is my people's enemy. By Marika long betrayed. Set aflame. I believe Miquella's apologies when he says our delivery will come, but never will I see your kind as worthy. And yet my oath I cannot overlook. If Miquella it is whom you would seek, then comrade, allow me to give you this. These are the sites of the crosses I found. I urge you, follow after Miquella. As long as you abide by his footfalls, you will be no enemy to me. Miquella has said as much himself. He wishes now to throw it all away. He says the act, though undoubtedly painful, will sear clean the Erdtree's wanton sin. The truth of his claim can be found at each cross. It is evidence enough to earn my belief.
After the charm, Hornsent says,
Intriguing. What remains there to be said? Do you presume us allies even now? Though Miquella's spell is newly broken, I must profess, the spell mattered little. Uphold his covenant Miquella shall, and in godhood redeem our ruleful clan. Then Marika and vilest Erdtree both will at last be from divinity wrenched. And surely, contented I will be. But first, clear resounds the call of vengeance. The Impaler, Mesmer, must pay his due. In vengeance for the flames, my blade I wield. How could I allow myself to forget? Revenge alone assures me peace of mind.
The only part of Hornsent that appears to have been charmed from him is his rampant hatred, preventing him from being a potential threat, like Ansbach was. To keep his side of the vow to what Miquella clearly seems to have promised him, neutralizing a potential threat without killing them, as every other person would do. After the charm breaks, he acknowledges that in regards to his opinion on Miquella, nothing had changed. This shows his confidence in Miquella upholding his end of the vow to the Hornsent and his people, as each pillar denoting something he divested was evidence of his resolve, and proof he was upholding his promise. Before the charm, Dryleaf says, After the charm, Dryleaf says... In all seriousness though, when we read Dryleaf Dane's alternated set, sun-faded and lightly soiled travel attire worn by clergymen, the leather satchel hanging from the shoulder is decorated with one of Miquella's emblem, a golden grass motif. Dryleaf Dane is always on Miquella's side, from before the charm and after it. Even Leda appears to trust Dryleaf Dane solely and most, and mentions only him by name in the boss fight.
Don't you dare approach Miquella the Kind. Needle Knight Leda, Dryleaf Dane, and our ally will never allow this.
Before the charm, Mogh says,
Hello there. Together, we work. Together, for Miquella the Kind. Many things we have found. I like finding things. For you, Lady Leda, her allies, and the Forager brood. Things bring joy to all.
After the charm, Mogh says,
I don't feel it. It's broken. Kind Miquella's light is gone. But I stand tall. Together, we work. Together, for Miquella the Kind. I don't know what to do. Our mother abandoned her brood. She did not love us. We are her children. What should we do? Must we be sad forever? Maybe that's kindly Miquella's love. Love for all the unloved. Love to banish the pain.
Mogh's faith in Miquella to break the cycle of hatred, revenge, and bring their brood from sadness to forget the pain of being abandoned by their mother is something he is willing to lay his life down for. It is evident by his words that he loves Miquella, both before and after the charm is broken. He even seems sad when it breaks, describing it as kind Miquella's light, and then immediately reaffirming himself for Miquella. Before the charm, Freya says,
Ah, well met. That was a fine battle indeed. It heartens me that another warrior stands among us, among the beckoned. Long ago, I was stricken by scarlet rot in the swamp of Aeonia. Immobile, feverish, and in great pain, I was entirely resigned to death. I was left behind, and only kindly Miquella was good enough to seek me out. My wound was swollen and festering, exuding a most pungent odor, and yet he drained the poison from it, despite my wretched visage. Now, I consider this wound my compass. Let us both take kindly Miquella's guidance to heart. May we meet again on the battlefield, brave warrior.
After the charm, Freya says,
Oh, there you are. Good. If you happen to see Lady Leda, tell her that I'm striking out on my own. Don't worry, I've no mind to cross any of you. The guidance of kind Miquella remains etched into my very flesh. It's only... there's something that I must know. Kindly Miquella spoke of the vow he once made with General Radahn, and it is here the vow shall be honored. I am a Redmane. I must know the nature of the vow. I'll be out on my own for some time. There's something I must know. There is no need for concern. I will be true to my word. Though I do feel a hint of regret. Lady Leda, Honorable Ansbach, and warriors like you are all of a special breed. How glorious it would have been had we met in battle as sworn enemies. From Sir Ansbach to me, what on earth could it... Oh. Yes. Of course. I see. As the Festival of War concluded, General Radahn's soul met an honorable end, but kindly Miquella wishes to revive it. which is fine by me. I know it would pain old Jeren, but war has always suited General Radahn best, and certainly far more than any honorable death. Endless war to invigorate the soul, as befits General Radahn, the great lion. Thank you. Now I finally cast off my misgivings. Give my regards to Honorable Ansbach. Tell him, if we should meet in battle, to face your bow would be fine enough, but to face your blade would be an honor. Brave warrior. Perhaps next time, we too will meet on the battlefield.
It should be no surprise why Freya remains completely loyal to Miquella, going so far as to say his guidance is etched into her very flesh, and that we have no need to worry about her crossing us, and even laments we won't get to battle, convinced and resigned to the fact we will remain allies in Miquella's cause, given that we probably must have lost our wits to choose a different path. Funnily enough, on this point, it is telling that when Ansbach gives us a secret ritual information and expects Freya to burst into the fray in Radahn's honor, and effectively use her against Miquella to restore her lord's honor, and how when we tell him that it had pretty much the exact opposite effect, he seems surprised and said that he should have expected as much, suggesting he didn't, and that Freya just doesn't get it. She simply remembers that she wants to know the nature of the vow between Radahn and Miquella. Sis wanted the tea. Miquella charmed them, yes, to assure that they would not become an issue on his path to godhood, by keeping their word, perhaps the seal on a vow or contract. It is insinuated that he almost makes a vow with each of them, so this idea of a charm being a seal on that contract does to me make sense. However, while we acknowledge this, we should also acknowledge that all but 2 of those that were charmed ended up defending Miquella with their life after the charm had broken. He had not abused their trust while they were charmed. In fact, he passed the test by treating them so well despite his power over them, honoring his part of the vow by keeping his promises and remaining true, divesting himself painfully of everything for the cause, that the breaking of his charm meant nothing. It revealed the truth of his efforts, that they had paid off. The reassurance from his allies' loyalty and love after the charm was broken is proof of his true nature. There is one other we know to have been charmed by Miquella, Mogh, and while we have discussed Ansbach and his situation, Mogh is most certainly worth exploring as well. So, let us take a closer look at the poor demon lord of blood that was apparently super innocent before evil Miquella used him. Mogh, who stole Miquella from the Haligtree and as a result ended up charmed, still kidnapped a child. Unless Miquella is capable of charming someone from a distance, which would be unfathomably OP and raise innumerable questions and possibilities, like why didn't he just mind control everyone, everywhere, etc., and frankly would go against what we have literally seen and experienced, as well as the fact he appears to have personally met all of the followers we know to be charmed. Or there was a meeting between the 2 of them beforehand, of which there is no in-game mention or even insinuation. I personally subscribe to Miquella simply making the best of a bad situation. So yes, kidnapped Miquella, and got love-bottomized as a result. Even if he was charmed by satellite by Miquella, Mogh is the leader of the Pureblood Knights, an order of fearsome knights and assassins who spread the, good word. Pureblood Knights have a hazing ritual that is to kill a maiden and soak a cloth in her blood. Not an exceptional start to the road to innocence, I must say, and very potentially the reason we are maidenless. Let that sink in. We can find an imprisoned merchant, specifically named as such, who seems to have been driven mad by his solitude in this beyond freaky blood cave full of tombstones in Mogh. I'm seeing a pattern. Oh, and wait, it looks like Vare is also a kidnappee, one of many surgeons stolen from the battlefield. And he was the sole exception, being able to tame the accursed blood. I do wonder what happened to those that could not. I bet it was super innocent. I'm not saying Mogh is any better or any worse than any of the other demigods. What I'm saying is that he is not innocent. The allegations were not beaten, and he was playing the game of thrones, looking himself for ascendance and power. Ansbach himself admits the risks that accompany this journey. We never hear of what Miquella promised Mogh, if anything. In fact, the only information we get pertaining to their quote-unquote relationship after Miquella was kidnapped and Mogh was charmed is remembrance of Mogh, Lord of Blood, wishing to raise Miquella to full godhood. Mogh wished to become his consort, taking the role of monarch. But no matter how much of his bloody bedchamber he tried to share, he received no response from the young Empyrean. Now you want to talk about a lack of consent. How was Miquella leading anyone on here? In fact, this really does lead me to believe that Miquella never intended to leave the Haligtree, and his capture by Mogh was unintended. This would be supported by the fact that Miquella never appeared to communicate with Mogh past his initial charm, never answering his wish nor appearing to even promise him anything, hence described as a wish, not a vow or a promise. The fact that envoys appear at the Haligtree to signal that he was already close to becoming a god, and that this would be the side of it. And potentially the appearance of mercy killers, such as Varys, being Miquella's attempt to make a perverse and unacceptable situation as compassionate as it could be. Mogh forced Miquella to make the best of a terrible situation, and so by forcing him into this less than compassionate situation, instead of watering the Haligtree with his own blood as he was, and has shown since that he's not shy of using his own flesh for the greater good against his own personal sake, now forced to bathe in the blood of others. His response to Mogh's one-sided wish, stemming from a lust for power and authority, which would be poison in his age of compassion and unbefitting entirely of lordship, was still met, in kind, with a small token of compassion. Mogh would exist as part of the new dynasty, even if in body only. His tainted soul that compelled him to force Miquella into this situation would be discarded, necessarily, like St. Trina. Frankly, if you want to get specific, Mogh technically is going to be a part of a new dynasty with Miquella, 50% of him, and 50% of Radahn. To be honest, he probably should have just read the fine print. Miquella essentially just got the bad guy who kidnapped him and used what he had already done and was doing to propel him into the Shadowlands, far away from the kidnapping maiden Merca. It isn't Miquella's fault that Mogh's personality wouldn't be fitting as a lord for his age of compassion. He should have just taken the bod compliment. So yeah, all of you celebrating Mogh's redemption might want to rethink things. Again, no Wi-Fi charming as far as we know, and the reason you have no bitches and end up with a doll at best is likely him. Just saying. If Miquella could charm people to do whatever he wants, why even have a vow? Why even have conditions? If we fulfill our side of the vow, for example, either there are limits to his power that we're unaware of, or he does not abuse the power of his charm, making a deal instead of one-sidedly compelling blind obedience. Given everything I've spoken about so far, I personally lean more to the latter. As explained earlier, I personally believe that he uses this charm to enforce pre-agreed upon vows. In essence, holding people to their word. The ultimate pinky swear. But you know what? I don't even have to think about if or not Radahn was charmed. Because if you know a single thing about Radahn, it wouldn't be hard to recognize this outcome as his literal dream come true. I want to highlight a few things about Radahn as a person and the people surrounding him that support the idea that he did consent to this plan and was fully aware of it. If you don't agree, fine, but I expect a better argument than, "No, you can't just turn Chadon gay and incest. I'm an expert on his sexuality, so I'd know." Because, sweetheart, it's George. Yes, he can. And would. Have you seen, let alone read, Game of Thrones? Anyway, Radahn is a compassionate warmonger. He was a cat man, loved his horse, and was sentimental about it. and had a good, sometimes arguably, allegedly, too good relationship with his siblings. Yet he idolized Godfrey and relished for battle as a Redmane, and took honor seriously. Given what we know about his likes, dislikes, and personality, here is the boon of his pinky promise with Miquella. Now you tell me if this sounds like a deal you think he would jump on. Radahn would be the lord of a god, just like his hero Godfrey before him. He would be engrossed in a compassionate war for world conquest to gain and maintain control, an unending festival of battle, the largest one to ever exist. He would do so in a body renewed, youthful, and prime. Radahn spent his life being carried around by a feeble steed that he adored. Now, he would be the powerful steed for his feeble brother, paying true honor to his fallen comrade of the festival. Love Leonard? Become Leonard. In another light, Miquella is essentially acting as Siraj for Radahn, being the guiding, unalloyed light that would stay his arm when compassion would permit it. Just like the noble and powerful Godfrey and Siraj, who kept his lord in line with the principles of their order, he was getting to live the glorious life of his hero, in arguably an even better, more incredible and exciting context. In his prime, even Freya, who he personally selected from the Colosseum to be one of his most trusted knights, and since we know how much Radahn loves battle, she was one of his favourite people in one of his favourite things. If anyone knew about Radahn, it would be Freya. And upon learning of what had been done to Radahn, she, without any hesitation, said that she was fine with it, and that it was what suited Radahn best. She does note that this would upset Jeren, the other closest figure to Radahn, but I will explain why that also makes sense in the next part. If the logic of all that alone isn't enough for you, then let me give you a layout of the events leading up to this to maybe make it make sense. Here is the SparkNotes version. Miquella, Malenia, and Radahn make a vow between each other, hence our side of the vow. I believe it went something like, if Miquella reaches godhood and Malenia meets Radahn in battle, Radahn agrees to be Miquella's promised lord consort. Radahn held the stars so that Miquella could begin his preparations to go to the Shadow Realm and complete his goals there, while pausing the fates of all demigod competitors, the same fate which he himself divested of. I strongly believe that it is also very possible that Radahn halted the stars after Miquella was taken from the Haligtree, to give him the time to adjust to his new circumstances and prepare himself. Malenia marches for Radahn to meet him in battle, as both a signal that Miquella was ready for the stars to continue, which is the most Radahn signal ever, a war, and as fulfillment as part of their vow, for a clash of titans between the two most powerful Empyreans. Also the most Radahn thing ever. Self-deletion was not honourable, nor is a rigged win, and so neither were acceptable for Radahn. So he made Jeren promise him an honourable death via the festival of Radahn, assuring his own death, the continuation of the stars, and his ascendance to Miquella in the event he won, or there was a stalemate. The worst case scenario eventuated. He lived, and his mind did not, resolving him to a titanic cannibal mess, who remembered nothing but war. However, the contingency was already in place, well before the events. This is why it would upset Jeren, because Jeren doesn't know about Miquella's plan, just as Freya didn't, and he promised Radahn an honourable death, unknowingly, as part of Miquella and Radahn's plan. Lastly, explaining Caelid, and this is a total speculation, but I believe that it's no coincidence that Malenia's Heart of Aeonia, which is a rot crucible, see my video on crucibles in the description for more information on that, is directly above Miquella's cocoon, a blood crucible, definitely see the video, which are in essence events of mass death used to draw power from the death of life, to achieve something grand in nature, in this case, to further power the cocoon to allow us to travel to the Shadow World, the blood crucible of Mogh allowing this demigod to travel there, with this new booster signal, if you will, allowing for us to travel there through him. But I digress. You would only think Radahn fought against this horrible fate if you couldn't handle the thought of him being gay for his younger brother, which, look, is pretty heavy even to say out loud, but let's not pretend he wasn't involved with this, and that is nowhere beneath him. But if that's what's holding you back from accepting things as they are, maybe you, like me, have or are a younger brother, and you are mortified by the concept of having them as your consort. Well, let me say this. Instead of incest, get your mind out of the gutter and picture the context for Radahn I just laid out for you. Picture an older, stronger, kind-hearted, animal-loving brother who loves to wrestle and LARP as his favourite wrestler, playing outside with his younger, dainty and frail brother, who clutches to his back and pretends to be a kindly mage, or secret royal prince that must be protected by his stronger brother. The older brother would crush anyone that was mean or cruel to his younger brother, and the younger brother was so pure of heart that he would stop his older brother and check if the bullies were okay, and nurse them if they weren't. The older brother would well with pride and admiration for the selflessness and purity of his younger brother, and would protect that happily, on an adventure forever, spreading his younger brother's compassion throughout the lands with his might. The velvet glove and the iron fist. That is the type of dynamic we literally bear witness to, and the one you decide to end, because you decided based on what? That Radahn wouldn't want to rule the world with his own brother? Living the life of his hero? This is everything he wanted. One of his most trusted soldiers not only agrees, but doesn't even hesitate before she does. But clearly, the Radahn sexuality experts out there know better than her. The last bullet in the Miquella is evil gun, and the main contention for many with the previous discussion regarding charming and the charmed, free will. My free will. Miquella is taken away our free will, and therefore he is a totalitarian dictator, and therefore evil, checkmate, Miquellested. And I guess laws and punishment from breaking those laws, such as jail, are depriving someone of their free will, by definition confining them, by enacting consequences for their actions, therefore only really giving the illusion of free will, which is like saying free speech is allowed and then punishing someone for what they say, is having actions with consequences created specifically to discourage them and labeling them an illegal activity, any worse or different than having those same boundaries but as impossible to commit in the first place. If the intention is to stop that thing from occurring in both of these scenarios, then what's the issue? It isn't a band-aid on a bullet wound. It is a preventative, not a reactive. The cause, not just the symptom. This was the way Miquella could break the cycle of hatred and revenge that shattered the world. However, the issue everyone runs into with this is who would be the one that decides what is illegal. Humans are subject to their own perspectives and feelings. Imperfect laws made from imperfect humans, interpreted and enacted by other imperfect humans, would be an absolute disaster if it was imposed on people magically, curtailing what they can do. Miquella realized that arbitrary powers with their own emotions and favoritisms and prejudices would absolutely abuse the position of power they are in. Justice wouldn't be applied equally, and the judge in the chair is different from the judge next door, terribly human, with no consistency. As however gold one may be, they are still gold, a mixed alloy, impure, inconsistent, and complicated. Having seen this flaw, as Goldmask did, Miquella turned himself from a being of complex emotion, prejudices born from life experience, love so toxic it could kill and favors one person over another, loyalty that breeds paranoia and prejudice, and so on, and cut everything away until he himself was reborn, unalloyed. He essentially turned himself into a vessel of absolute compassion, void of any preconceived notions or prejudices, and embraced everything. If Ted Bundy was welling inside with a desire to mutilate and murder people, or a certain race got the itch to start pickling folks, and Miquella gave them a big old hug and charmed them into visions of only love, that would be the neurological correction, akin to a very effective medication for this person's soul's affliction. Miquella is only really removing your free will to impose on the life of others, to, in essence, prevent people from being horrible to one another. He is placing boundaries, akin to and with the same intention of laws, allowing everyone to exist in a world where the cycle of hatred, revenge, and cruelty are broken and may never spin again. No deed will go uncensored, the whole of it will be embraced. Together, to our Eden. Yes, he may in some circumstances deprive an individual of an aspect of their free will, like the urge to murder, mutilate, or jar people. However, these boundaries are hardly unfair. Who of you would argue for the right to free will to destroy someone else's life, or act on hatred, poisoning themselves in the process? Are we, the tarnished, who have butchered our way through the lands between, invaded every corner of the map we can, marching into castles like they're our own, massacring pretty much everyone and everything, in any position to point the finger at Miquella? If the road to hell is paved with good intentions, you can only imagine what the path to godhood is paved with. Every faction vying for power in the lands between is doing so at the expense of all else. Yet every action taken by Miquella has been the most compassionate it can be. The action requiring the least death, the path with the least necessary evils. And given every other godhood we know is built on a crucible, which are events of mass death, this is not an easy task to achieve. He created the Haligtree to embrace all and to raise himself to divinity like his mother and the Erdtree. That is evidenced by the fact the entire tree is surrounded by envoys, supporting this area being the intended place of his ascension. A Haligtree, mind you, that unlike the other sites of divinity or attempted ascension or crucibles, he warded with his own blood. He was absconded from that tree and made the best of a mortifying situation. Unless he Wi-Fi charmed Mogh to come and get him, and even then, he simply used this lunatic's blood crucible to launch him as far away as possible. He didn't graft or absorb others, betray his friends as loose ends, or anything of the sort. He tore off everything he had, and used an already existing divine gate to ascend. The worst that people can shoot at him for are the charm accusations and the implications of that, which I believe by this point, I've thoroughly addressed. On the other hand, you would have to justify Godric and his grafting, Rani and her murder conspiracies and allegiances, Rykard and cannibalism and sadism, Mogh and his Order of Blood and their actions, Fear the Deathbed Companion and murder, the Dung Eater. The only one you wouldn't really have to is Goldmask, and all he really does is put a pause to things and prevent the Outer Gods from meddling. Basically, Rani's ending, but without Dolly Mama. He isn't necessarily making the world better. He is allowing it to govern and hopefully fix itself without the interference of the Outer Gods. Which I'm not saying is the worst, but with all of the ages past and the horrors involved, when it's been left to civilizations to thrive, we can do better. Miquella seeks to enact an age of compassion, one where the cycle of hatred and revenge would be an impossibility. In order to have a force that is capable of indiscriminately making boundaries that curtail acts like murder, torture, cruelty, etc., and enforcing these universal laws of compassion without prejudice or favoritism, he divested himself of everything. He, in essence, ended himself to be reborn as a perfect and fair arbiter of compassion. In this scenario, as a great analogy for the wars that would be fought for the age of compassion, Miquella even gives us an opportunity to embrace compassion, mid-fight, as we are trying to kill him and his brother. He literally has Radahn hug us, instead of snapping our spine like a twig, which in this moment let no one pretend otherwise. He very well could, and gives us a promise, and then a compassionate way out of the fight. What other enemy does that? Ever? This, in my eyes, is an ending, and one that makes total sense, complemented with gold text. Us, the marauding lord of the Old Order, refuse to continue fighting and leave Miquella and Radahn to begin crafting the world of their vision. We could easily leave it there, never re-entering the boss room, and forfeit the remembrance which, need I remind you, is a death trophy. 1,000 years of compassion would embrace this crippled world. But you just can't handle that, can you? You need to have a remembrance. You're bloodthirsty for it. Your history and your actions have shown that. You need to have that cutscene, no matter how short and how reinforcing of your poor decision it is. You're not satisfied with a charming and unique end to a battle. Not satisfied with an emote solidifying your promises. You want the weapons and power of the Lord and God, and a 10-second cutscene. And for it, you will murder a child and his dream and near achieving of a compassionate world. And yet you have the audacity to point your withering hypocritical finger at Miquella the Kind. I think we are well overdue for a good, long, hard look in the mirror. All he has ever done, all he has ever tried to do, is right the wrongs in the world, heal the sickly, defend the persecuted, to make the world a gentler place. And yet he has gotten the absolute least benefit of the doubt compared to any other character in the game, including but not limited to the literal demon lord of blood. It has been mentally undoing seeing so many people rail against the literal kindest, most benevolent force in the game. Someone who stripped away everything to give us everything. Someone who has the support of even the people he charmed after the charm is broken, who would lay their lives down to protect him, in favor of someone who literally wears a mask to give us the impression of a kindly old man. The audacity to, as the butcher of the lands between, think for a second you have the right to call anyone else a monster, is in and of itself wild. But him? Really? Anyway, after this, if you're still blind to the truth, never fear. I have a magic trick to show you.
It's gone. I want to hear proposition.
I hereby swear to every living being and every living soul. Now comes the age of our Eden, 1,000-year voyage, guided by compassion. Beginning here, love encompasses all. No living thing will be denied. No deed censured. I am ready to embrace the whole of it. Let us go together. Radahn, my promised consort.